On this episode of Death by Bunjie, I head to Maryland for the Early Crossbow season. Season 3 of Death by Bunjie starts right now. Now, I've said it before, I like to go to Maryland for the early season, the early crossbow season. And the reason I like to do that is to try out my equipment. I like to go out there and work out those pre-season jitters, exercise my tree stand muscles a little bit, get back in the saddle, and see how the stuff is going to go for the upcoming Pennsylvania Crossbow season. It's just a good idea overall to get one hunt in before the main season, my goal of the entire year, the Pennsylvania Crossbow season, the 37 days of awesome. It's just a good idea for me to get that under my belt before the Pennsylvania Crossbow season starts. Maryland starts about a month before, 3 to 4 weeks before the Pennsylvania Crossbow season, and for that reason, I like to try and get a weekend in, and I've done this. This is the 4th year in a row I've gone to Maryland. It's also a good time to fill a tag and get a head start on filling the freezer. Now, just like a lot of people, I've got a job. I can't take off an unlimited amount of time. I only have a few days to hunt in Maryland, but I make use of it after being dead tired, making a 5-hour drive all the way to Maryland after work one day. I finally get down there, I get set up, and I start out the morning of my first day in the early season, hunting over a small pile of corn along a clear cut in some old growth forest. One of the things I like about Maryland is they really manage their property. There's property down there, I think property values are through the roof. It's very valuable property, and they do a great job of managing their timber. They leave a lot of the more valuable hardwood species around. Not necessarily the best for deer, but when they do timber off those tracts of land, it leaves a large area of regrowth, new growth, and that makes it thick, dense cover for deer, and it holds a lot of deer. I really like that about that setup in Maryland. On that morning, I set myself up in a tree stand overlooking that little pile of corn, and sure enough, before too long, a doe and a fawn came in and they made their way up toward my tree stand. Didn't know why I was there. They saw that new pile of corn, that fresh pile of corn, and they were quite interested in that. They were making their way around. Eventually, though, the doe seemed to catch on. She seemed to think that this was a little bit too good to be true. She'd probably been around the block once before. And eventually she made eye contact with me. I wasn't moving. I thought I was doing a really good job. And despite the fact that it was 95 degrees down there, I was maintaining my scent-free regimen the best I could, trying to stay as scent-free as possible. Eventually she caught on, though, and she snorted and ran out of there, took the fawn with her. And that was it for that morning. That evening I had a great setup, though, a spot I really liked. It was a section in a corner of a field, sort of over my left shoulder, a field with a little corn pile in it there. Directly to my left is a big stand of pines. Now, I don't know if that holds deer or not, but it certainly can't hurt. In front of me was the clear cut, that new growth forest, very thick deer cover, very thick deer habitat, and that extended around to my right as well. So I'm surrounded on two sides here by that clear cut and the pines off to my left. The only clear area is out behind me. It didn't take long and I started to hear some activity coming out of that clear cut. Sure enough, it was what turned out to be a fawn making her way directly toward my tree stand, walks directly in front of my tree stand, sniffing and walking around, and she's being chased by a spike buck. Sure enough, she came in, she had wanted nothing to do with the buck. She was making her way around, sniffing in front of my tree stand. I still had spots. The fawns down there this time of year in that early crossbow season still have spots. So they're easy to pick out if you take a good look at them. Spike was persistent. He came around from behind me and chased her on out of the area. Now it's the early crossbow season in Maryland. Sure enough, I could have taken a shot at that spike buck, but he never presented the opportunity. But nevertheless, those two deer run off. It's great to be back in the saddle, great to be back in the tree stand and finally seeing some deer up close and personal. Now, like I said, I'm trying to exercise my tree stand muscles. The time comes where I'm getting a little bit stiff, getting a little bit leg weary, so I finally stand up, stretch my legs a little bit and stretch my back. And sure enough, while I'm standing there holding the crossbow out in front of me, I can hear some movement. I hear some activity over in the pines. I can hear some needles rustling, some branches breaking, that sort of thing. Now, it's so thick out there, I can't tell who's there. I can't tell if anybody's coming my way, what it is. So I'm just getting ready, and before I have a chance to even sit down and start thinking about which way that deer is going to come out to me, whether it's going to come out in front of me over in the clear-cut area, or whether it's going to come out to my left out toward that corn pile. By the time it comes out, I see it's a doe making her way across that open field. She's sort of cutting off that corner, headed into the clear cut behind me. Now, I don't have 2 seconds to think about this. I'm standing up. I'm not even positioned in the tree stand, ready to take a shot. I do the best I can. I give her a quick grunt. She stops, and I take a shot. Now, I felt like I made a good shot. It was a clear 15-yard setup of a shot. Perfect shot. I couldn't ask for a better opportunity than that. Felt like I got both lungs. She ran around behind me and made her way out in front of the tree stand, heading back into that clear cut. But one thing I want to be clear about, the story of this hunting trip is that it is hot. The temperatures are over 90 degrees every day I'm there. The heat index on this day is over 100 degrees. The last thing that I want to do is leave that deer there any longer than I have to, laying out in that heat. Even though we got plenty of daylight left, I pack up my gear, I text my guide, have him come over and pick me up and help me find that deer. It was very easy to find her. The blood trail went right around where I had seen her go. I picked up the arrow, followed the blood trail, a couple of really nice spots of blood, and before I knew it, I came across that doe. Life is so easy. Life is easy. Don't make it hard. The guy next to me pipes up really quick. He says he's fat and it's making him sick. So sure enough, we've got deer number 1 in the freezer for this year, and I head back to the hotel to get a much needed shower and a nice rest to head out for the next morning. Now, I'm in a totally different stand this time. I am looking out over the clear cut directly in front of me, but in the area where my tree stand is, I'm completely wide open. I am sitting there amongst just a sparsely populated section of old growth forest, lots of tall trees. During that time, while I'm sitting there, I start to see some deer come out, and I hear a little bit of activity out in front of me along that clear cut of the deer making their way up through there. Sure enough, another doe and her fawn are coming out to inspect that corn. They're looking around, and I have a 30-yard broadside shot, a perfect shot on this doe that I could take. Now, I'm very interested in getting another deer for the freezer, if at all possible, but that fawn is right behind her, right in tow, and I start thinking back to the doe that I had just shot the day before, thinking, man, maybe that doe had a fawn out there, and maybe that fawn is now without its mother, and you start thinking about those things when you're sitting in the tree stand. Now, they don't actually come into the corn. I think they sensed something was up. They're very cautious around these corn piles. It's very early in the season. These deer eventually make their way off, and that's the end of that morning. I make my way back to the hotel, take a shower once again, get all set up, and back for my last evening in Maryland. So for my last evening, I go back to that first tree stand. I go back to the same tree stand where I shot that nice doe on my first evening. Thought maybe I could get lucky once again in that same spot. See if lightning is going to strike twice. I am sitting through the worst heat that I've ever sat through as far as hunting is concerned. Again, the heat index over 100 degrees. Heat like that not only makes it hard to stay scent free, but it also does another thing. It makes those deer not want to get up and move. I'm sitting through this heat. The deer are also sitting somewhere in that clear cut through this same heat. They're not getting up. They're not coming my way. They're not coming to the corn pile. They're not doing anything. So I sit there for most of the afternoon, all the way up until evening. About 45 minutes before the end of the shooting hours, I start to hear some more activity, and I see a fawn come out. Now, the first thing I'm thinking is, I wonder if this fawn is the fawn of the doe that I just shot. She comes out, there's no doe with her. She makes her way out into the field. She's checking out one of the corn piles, and eventually she makes her way around to the other corn pile. She's very alert. She's looking around. She's looking back to see if she hears anybody coming. She's very aware of her surroundings, very able to eat the corn, very able to take care of herself. And then at the end of the day, as the sun begins to set, as the shooting hours wane, she makes her way back into the pines to spend the evening there. Seeing that fawn got me to thinking also that I guess this time of year, we have hunting seasons in the fall for a reason. Seeing those fawns this time of year, even though they are young, they've got spots, they're still able to handle themselves, to exist on their own, able to survive the upcoming winter here in Maryland. Now, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer here, but tell me your thoughts. Do you think it's a good idea to pass on those does that have fawns with them, or do you take those shots? In the end, I'm just happy to have a doe to bring back here. A nice deer for the freezer, got plenty of venison here, got it cleaned up, packed up the coolers, brought that deer home, and now we're looking forward to the Pennsylvania Crossbow season. We're just about 2 weeks away from the Pennsylvania Crossbow season. Make sure you stay tuned here to Death by Bunjie. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe. Check out our other videos here on the YouTube channel, and check out our Facebook page. Make sure you like that page as well to follow all of the updates on Death by Bunjie there. Until next time, all hail Bunjie!